Alright, let's take a look at how to write an introduction section. Your introduction section for your research paper is going to be maybe the most complicated part of your research paper. Why? Well, because the research in the introduction section requires that you take the reader from a place of being totally unaware of what's going on to the place where they are ready and prepared. They know all of the background information they need to know. They probably saw learned about existing research in a topic area so that they can take in the information that you're going to give them. They can take in your research. The introduction section has the least amount of formulaic nature to it in the academic writing paper, because what you need to talk about is hugely different, and there are many, many, many different ways to approach any given subject. What I've got here is kind of an outline of the things you want to talk about, but you're not always going to find introduction sections that follow this precisely. For the purposes of this class, I'll encourage you to put together first a paragraph that's kind of your intro. What do I mean? So the first part of the introduction should grab the reader through some sort of brief anecdote or data. If you're talking about subjective age, you might say, your first sentence might be, the younger people feel, the longer they live. A simple fact, but something that would definitely make sense to anybody. It's not jargon, and that would grab people's attention. Then you would want to define what's going on. So your second sentence in that paragraph or the next section might talk about, well, what do we mean by how young people feel? Subjective age is a variable that researchers use to assess how old people feel. It's measured by asking them, how old do you feel? And has been used in many different studies. In that first paragraph, maybe in the second paragraph, you're going to want to start presenting references and citations. You might say, this, after that sentence I said, subjective age has been investigated in many studies. Parenthesis, citation, citation, citation. Other research that demonstrates that that's true. Subjective age has been very strongly linked to people's longevity. Citation, citation, citation. And you want to introduce all of the main topics for your current research. So you want to bring in and also say a big factor in subjective age might be people's understanding of their age compared to others. So maybe you're doing research about how people's opinions about their age can affect their subjective age and therefore can affect their health over time. And so you would explain those ideas. And by the end of the first section there, you definitely want your readers to have a notion of what your research questions are or what your main research goals are going to be. Because then you can follow in and explain some more of the important details, like how do you do this research? Some people have assessed people's subjective age through surveys, but when assessing people's opinions about age, we use this particular paradigm. We show them pictures of different ages and see how they react, or we have them talk to different people about their age and we see if they wince when they mention 30-year-olds or 40-year-olds or 50-year-olds or whatever. That second part is definitely going to be a great place to reference existing research. When you present your research question, it's always a good idea to have existing research that suggests or helps inform your hypotheses. So you might say, we hypothesize that people who think age is just a number are going to be less affected by their subjective age in terms of health than people who focus a lot on age, who may have a bigger, and for those people who focus on age a lot, subjective age may have a bigger impact on their health. And then you're going to point that writing towards a focal point. So you could, through those statements I just suggested, through the existing research, point your reader. But another thing you can do is say, well, research into subjective age has constantly found that age is related to how long people live. However, there has been a gap in the research because we have never asked whether or not people have a desirable age or an ideal age that they want to be at, and whether or not such a desirable or ideal age is important. So by picking up things that maybe hasn't been addressed in research yet, or pointing out flaws in existing research, in some way you're going to want to point your reader towards your research question and why your research question is important. Research questions can be important because they haven't been researched before, because it's the logical next step, because of something new. In this age of COVID, feeling younger is even more important because it allows you to feel safer when going outside. Or in situations where your life may be in danger, being older makes you more willing to go outside because you are less concerned about dying and more concerned about having an impact in the world. Therefore, we're going to investigate whether or not there is actually a relationship between your age and your desire to leave the household. The last part of your introduction should always focus on making your current studies clear and understandable. You might briefly explain your method, you might explain it for layman's terms. If your method doesn't really need explaining, you could just say, in the current study, we did a survey to assess whether people's subjective ages are the same as they were 20 years ago. In that same sentence, you've almost entirely explained your method as well as your research goals. If your method is complicated, making sure that the connection between your method and your research questions is clear is super important. So let's say that you're going to ask about people's subjective age, but you're not really, let's say you're investigating the relationship between subjective age and how long people live. But you're going to do so by seeing, well, how wary are people of talking about their age in a social conversation? The reason that we need to assess subjective age through this social conversation paradigm instead of a simple survey is that we suspect people may show a more realistic opinion of their subjective age through what they wish to talk about instead of what they actually say on a survey. As long as it makes sense, as long as you make your methodological choices clear, that's what you want to accomplish. Another thing is you might say, research has shown that if we bring people into a laboratory that has a sign on it saying Age Research Lab, they are less willing to be honest about their age, and therefore we have made sure there are no indications that this lab focuses on age. Pointing out those sort of things could be a big factor. And one of the best things to do in that final section is to mention potential explanations for outcome. So we say, if people avoid mentioning their age, that tells us that they are concerned about their age, and therefore they may have an older subjective age than they actually are willing to say. If people are not concerned about their age or they're willing to speak, they may have a younger subjective age than they're willing to say. And so we're going to have people talk about their subjective age, talk about how old they are and how old they feel in regular conversation, in addition to having them complete a survey, and we're going to see whether those things pan out. So the introduction section is going to be complicated because I can't tell you exactly how to write your introduction section. I can tell you that you're going to want to write it out and then think about what things do you need to talk about. I can tell you that I ask people to work on their introduction section as the last part of their paper because by now you should be very, very familiar with your method and your research questions and your goals, and that'll make it easier for you to think about what people need to understand in order to start learning about your study. It'll make it easier to know what background information you need to present. And hopefully it'll make it easier for you to write that introduction. I'd really strongly encourage you to take a look at the introduction, the example introduction presented in the class website here. And if you have any questions about how to write your introduction, as always, feel free to send me an email. I've been Gabriel Sines, and I hope this week's material has been interesting and enlightening and hopefully not too stressful. I'm sorry I spent the whole time talking about age. Have a great week.